Many of you mention BSD in the comments, and you often do it with a particular tone, almost superiority. If you used BSD, you'd understand. Linux is chaos, BSD is order. I'll tell you the truth. I knew about BSD, I knew it existed, but I'd never really tried it or seriously studied it. And this made me think, why does BSD seem to have this almost mystical aura in the open source community? What makes it so different from Linux? Are they really that different, or is it just tribalism? So I decided to take a journey, a deep journey. I wasn't interested in making the usual superficial video, BSD is like this, Linux is like that. I wanted to truly understand the philosophy, the architecture, the technical choices, the practical consequences of those choices. What you're about to see is probably the most detailed comparison ever made on YouTube between BSD and Linux. Technical, but also philosophical, because in the end, choosing an operating system isn't just a technical matter, it's a worldview. I try to be intellectually honest, but remember, this is always my opinion, my interpretation. I downloaded and tried the main BSD systems, but let me be clear, this is just a first acquaintance. To truly understand an operating system takes years, if not decades of daily use. So if some longtime BSD user has something to say about my conclusions, that's normal, and I accept it. But let's get started anyway. To understand BSD and Linux, we need to go back to the 70s, to the original Unix from Bell Labs. Unix was born in AT&T laboratories as a revolutionary operating system, portable, modular, elegant. But AT&T was a regulated telephone monopoly and couldn't sell software commercially. So what does it do? It distributes Unix to universities, practically for free, with source code included. The University of Berkeley takes it and starts modifying it, adds networking, improves the virtual memory system, creates fundamental tools. BSD is born, Berkeley software distribution. It's not a copy of Unix, it's Unix itself, evolved. This is fundamental. BSD descends directly from original Unix. It has Unix's DNA in the code. Then comes 1991. A Finnish guy named Linus Torvalds wants Unix on his PC, but can't afford commercial licenses. He decides to write his own kernel from scratch. He doesn't start from Unix, he re-implements it. He studies how Unix works, reads the POSIX specifications, and writes everything from scratch. Linux is not a child of Unix. Linux is a very well-studied photocopy, but written completely from scratch. This difference in origins creates consequences that propagate to this day. BSD carries with it decades of design decisions made in AT&T laboratories and at Berkeley. Linux instead starts fresh, without legacy, free to make modern choices. But there's more. In the 90s, BSD goes through a devastating legal war with AT&T over ownership of Unix code. Years of legal battles that block development. Meanwhile, Linux grows freely, without legal constraints, and when BSD finally emerges from the legal battle, Linux has already conquered enormous market shares. History could have been completely different. If there hadn't been that legal war, maybe today I'm not saying we'd all use BSD instead of Linux, but certainly BSD systems would have had much more popularity. Yes, because even within the BSD family, there is some diversification. But attention, it's not the same chaotic fragmentation as Linux. Here we're talking about projects with different objectives but the same basic philosophy. The three main ones are FreeBSD, oriented toward performance and ease of use, OpenBSD, obsessed with security, and NetBSD, focused on maximum portability on every possible hardware. Then there are others, but these are the pillars. This is the difference that changes everything, and few explain it well. BSD is a complete operating system. When you develop BSD, you develop everything together. Kernel, userland utilities, system libraries, documentation, installer. Everything is coordinated, everything follows a single philosophy, everything is released together as a coherent unit. When you download FreeBSD, OpenBSD, or NetBSD, you get an operating system, period. You don't choose which init system to use, you don't choose which default shell, you don't choose which file system layout. These decisions have already been made by the development team following a coherent vision. Linux instead is just a kernel. Yes, you heard right. Linux is the kernel, and that's it. Everything else, the entire userland, the utilities, the system tools, the package managers, the installers, the configurations, all this comes from distributions. This creates two completely different approaches to managing complexity. BSD says we decide how the system works. You use it as is or you fork the entire project. It's a top-down approach. There's a vision, a coherence. When you read BSD man pages, you know everything was written and reviewed by the same team. When you open the network configuration, you know it will follow the same logic as the firewall configuration. Linux says, we make the kernel, you decide everything else. It's a bottom-up approach. Each distro takes the Linux kernel and builds its own system on top according to its own philosophy. Debian has a philosophy, Arch has another, Fedora yet another. This has enormous consequences. BSD's positive side, incredible coherence. A BSD system is clean, orderly, logical. The documentation is integrated and complete. The code is organized rationally. There are no layers upon layers of abstractions. You don't have systemd doing one thing, initr doing another, and grub doing a third with different logics. BSD's negative side, less flexibility. If you don't like how BSD does things, your options are limited. Either you adapt or you fork the entire project. Linux's positive side, total flexibility. Don't like systemd? Use runit. Don't like apt? Use pacman. Want a minimal system? Arch. Want everything configured? Ubuntu. Linux is a framework on which to build operating systems. Linux's negative side, fragmentation. Every distro makes different choices. The same utilities behave differently. Documentation is scattered. A tutorial for Ubuntu might not work on Arch. A package available on Fedora might not exist on Debian. But attention, fragmentation isn't always bad. Linux's fragmentation has created incredible innovation. All innovations born because someone said, I don't like how it works now. I'll do it better. In BSD, this happens much less because the culture is different. It's the classic tension between stability and innovation. BSD privileges the first, Linux the second. If you think the heart of the difference is technical, you're wrong. The heart is here in the licenses. And this is the most important part of the video. Let's talk about BSD first. The BSD license is maximally permissive. Take the code, do what you want. You can modify it, you can distribute it, you can close it and sell it as a proprietary product. The only thing you have to do is maintain the copyright notice. That's it. This is absolute freedom for whoever takes the code, but it's also freedom to remove freedom. You take BSD, modify it, close it, and nobody will ever see your modifications. Linux uses the GPL, the new General Public License, and it's completely different. Here too, you can take the code, modify it, distribute it, but there's a fundamental constraint. If you distribute modifications, you must release the source code. It's the principle of copyleft. The freedom I give you must propagate. Now this difference seems small on paper, but it has created two completely different ecosystems. BSD is perfect for companies. Apple took FreeBSD and built macOS and iOS on it. Sony used BSD for PlayStation. Netflix uses FreeBSD for its streaming servers. Juniper Networks uses BSD for its routers. None of these companies has to release their code. They can take, modify, close, sell. This has an advantage. Companies willingly contribute to BSD because they're not afraid their modifications will end up with competitors. But it also has a disadvantage. Most of the improvements made by companies remain closed. The community doesn't benefit. Linux instead, with the GPL, creates a completely different network effect. Every improvement must return to the community. Google improves the kernel for Android. The patches must go back upstream. Red Hat optimizes the kernel for servers. Everyone benefits. This has created exponential growth. Thousands of developers, hundreds of companies, all contributing because they know their work won't be closed and appropriated by someone else. But the GPL has also created friction. Many companies fear the GPL. What if I use this GPL library in my product? Do I have to release all my code? This led to the birth of intermediate licenses like LGPL and MPL. The philosophical question is, which type of freedom is more important? The freedom to do anything with the code, even close it, or freedom guaranteed perpetually to all future users? BSD says maximum freedom for whoever takes the code now. Linux says maximum freedom propagated over time. And here, there's no right answer. It's a choice of values. Personally, I find the GPL more interesting because it creates a digital commons that grows over time. But I perfectly understand those who prefer freedom without constraints of BSD. What's certain is that without the GPL, we probably wouldn't have had the Linux explosion we've seen. The GPL has been the engine of the modern open source movement. Let's talk about something practical, hardware support. And here there's a clear winner. Linux supports practically everything. NVIDIA, AMD, Intel graphics cards, recent hardware, old hardware, embedded hardware, supercomputers, smartphones. Open a brand new laptop and Linux will probably work out of the box. Why? Numbers. The Linux kernel has thousands of contributors. Intel, AMD, NVIDIA, Google, Red Hat, Samsung all contribute drivers. Every new hardware gets supported quickly because companies have an interest in making it work on Linux. BSD instead comes later. Not always, but often. Take a very recent AMD graphics card. On Linux, the driver is already there, maybe in development, but it works. On BSD, you wait, sometimes months, sometimes years. This doesn't mean BSD is bad with hardware. It supports tons of hardware, but the adoption speed is slower. BSD is more conservative. It prefers to have stable drivers rather than bleeding-edge drivers. There's also a question of philosophy. OpenBSD, for example, refuses drivers with proprietary blobs. If a driver requires closed firmware, OpenBSD supports it only in a limited way. Linux instead is pragmatic. If a blob is needed to make the hardware work, we include it. That said, there's an important exception: enterprise networking and storage. Here, BSD often excels. 100 gigabit network cards, RAID controllers, professional storage hardware on BSD often work better or with superior performance because BSD is heavily used in enterprise environments for these purposes. But for desktop and laptop, Linux wins hands down. And this is one of the main reasons why BSD never broke through on the consumer desktop. Let's talk about security. And here BSD has a legendary reputation, especially OpenBSD. OpenBSD has a philosophy, secure by default. This means every single line of code is audited for vulnerabilities. It means unsafe features are disabled by default. It means the system is designed from day one to minimize attack surface. OpenBSD introduced security technologies years before Linux. WX, non-executable memory, ASLR, address space randomization, pledge and unveil, application sandboxing, all this was born on OpenBSD. The result? OpenBSD has had very few remote vulnerabilities in the last 20 years. It's the operating system you install on a firewall and sleep peacefully. But attention, this has a cost. OpenBSD is slow to adopt new features. It privileges security over everything. If a feature is cool but introduces risks, OpenBSD refuses or delays it. Linux instead is more pragmatic. You can make Linux very secure with CLinux, AppArmor, CComp, namespaces, capabilities, all very powerful technologies. But they're not active by default. Linux gives you the tools, you decide how to use them. This means a poorly configured Linux is much less secure than OpenBSD. But a well-configured Linux can be equally secure with more flexibility. FreeBSD is in the middle. It's not paranoid like OpenBSD, but it's more security conscious than Linux. It has jails for containerization, Mac framework for advanced security policies, Capsicum for sandboxing. The truth is that for most users, security depends more on how you configure the system than on the system itself. A properly updated and configured Linux server is very secure. A poorly configured BSD server can be vulnerable. But if you want a secure by default system, without having to worry about configuring 1,000 things, OpenBSD is unbeatable. Before we talk about general performance, we need to discuss something that makes FreeBSD particularly special: ZFS. ZFS is not just a file system. It's a complete storage management system that combines file system, volume manager, and RAID functionality in one elegant design. It has features that make system administrators cry with joy: snapshots, cloning, compression, deduplication, self-healing from corruption, and incredible data integrity guarantees. Now, ZFS was born at Sun Microsystems for Solaris, but FreeBSD adopted it early and integrated it deeply into the system. On FreeBSD, ZFS is a first-class citizen. You can boot from ZFS, the installer supports it natively, and it's maintained and optimized specifically for BSD. Linux technically supports ZFS through OpenZFS, but there's a problem: license incompatibility. ZFS uses the CDDL license, which is incompatible with the GPL. This means ZFS can never be included in the Linux kernel directly. You have to load it as a separate module, and it exists in a legal gray area. Some distributions won't ship it at all because of licensing concerns. This is one of the main reasons people choose FreeBSD for storage servers. If you're building a NAS, a backup server, or any storage-heavy system, FreeBSD with native ZFS is hard to beat. You get enterprise-grade features, rock-solid stability, and no licensing worries. And this brings us to a broader point about BSD and specialized use cases. While Linux tries to be everything for everyone, BSD systems often excel in specific domains because they can make focused design decisions without worrying about supporting every possible use case. Let's talk about containerization, because this is where the philosophical differences between BSD and Linux become really visible. FreeBSD had jails since 2000, 24 years ago. Long before Docker, long before Kubernetes, BSD had a mature containerization system. Jails let you isolate processes, file system, network, and create lightweight, virtualized environments. They're simple, elegant, and they work exactly how you'd expect from BSD. No magic, no complex abstractions, just clean isolation. Linux containers came later with LXC, and then Docker revolutionized how we think about containers. But here's the thing. Linux containers are built on multiple kernel features that were never designed to work together. You have namespaces for isolation, C groups for resource control, capabilities for privilege management, CComp for syscall filtering, AppArmor or CLinux for mandatory access control. It's powerful, incredibly flexible, but also complex. BSD jails are simpler by design. You don't have 15 different knobs to turn. You configure a jail, you start it, it works. This reflects the BSD philosophy. Give us one good way to do it, not 20 different ways. But here's where Linux won the war. Ecosystem. Docker, Kubernetes, the entire cloud-native ecosystem is built on Linux containers. Every tool, every tutorial, every enterprise solution assumes Linux. Even though BSD jails are arguably more elegant, they lost the mindshare battle. And this is painful for BSD advocates because jails were there first. They were better designed, but Linux containers became the standard anyway. It's a perfect example of how technical superiority doesn't always win. Network effects and ecosystem matter more. That said, if you're running a simple containerized setup without needing the entire Kubernetes ecosystem, FreeBSD jails are still fantastic. They're lighter, simpler, and for certain workloads, faster than Docker. Performance. Everyone wants to know, who's faster? The answer, it depends. FreeBSD excels at networking and storage. The network stack of FreeBSD has been optimized for decades. Netflix uses FreeBSD to serve petabytes of streaming because the throughput is exceptional. To give you an idea, Netflix measured that FreeBSD can serve 90+ GB of traffic from a single server. That's why they use it instead of Linux for their CDNs. Not because Linux can't do it, but because FreeBSD's network stack has been optimized for decades specifically for this. FreeBSD with natively integrated ZFS beats Linux on many storage workloads. Linux instead dominates on desktop, laptop, and general workloads. GPU drivers on Linux are better. Container support is native and mature. The cloud ecosystem is built on Linux. Kubernetes, Docker, the entire modern ecosystem is designed for Linux. On bare metal performance, pure benchmarks, the difference is minimal. Sometimes BSD wins, sometimes Linux. It depends on the workload. But there's one thing Linux absolutely dominates: scalability. The Linux kernel scales incredibly well from embedded systems with a few MB of RAM up to supercomputers with thousands of cores. BSD doesn't scale as well at the extremes. If you need to make an enterprise router or firewall, FreeBSD or OpenBSD. If you need to make a storage server with ZFS, FreeBSD. If you need to make a secure appliance, OpenBSD. If you need to do anything else, probably Linux. Let's talk about something rarely discussed, the community culture. Because choosing an operating system isn't just about technology, it's about the people behind it. The BSD community is small, experienced, and tends to value correctness over quick solutions. When you ask a question on a BSD forum or mailing list, you often get a detailed, well-thought-out answer that explains not just how to do something, but why it's done that way. The documentation reflects this. BSD man pages are famously comprehensive and well-written, but this comes with a certain, let's say, expectation. The BSD community expects you to read the documentation first, to understand the fundamentals, to not ask questions that are already answered in the manual. Some people find this attitude elitist. Others find it refreshing. The Linux community is vast and diverse. You have beginner-friendly spaces like Ubuntu forums where no question is too basic. You have technical spaces like Arch Linux where you're expected to know what you're doing. You have everything in between. This diversity is both a strength and a weakness. The strength is inclusivity. Linux has pathways for every skill level. Complete beginners can start with Ubuntu and gradually move to more technical distributions as they learn. The weakness is inconsistency. The quality of help you get varies wildly depending on where you ask, and sometimes the sheer volume of options and opinions can be overwhelming. BSD communities tend to have less drama. Decisions are made by smaller core teams. There's less public arguing about technical directions. When FreeBSD decides to do something, they do it. There's no Debian-level debates that go on for years. Linux communities have more drama, but also more experimentation. The systemd debate, for instance, led to the creation of alternative distributions. Some people see this as productive, creative destruction. Others see it as wasted energy. Neither approach is better. They're different. BSD appeals to people who want stability and clear direction. Linux appeals to people who want participation in decision-making and multiple options. Let's address what many of you are thinking. What about using BSD on the desktop? I'll be honest, it's possible, but it's not optimal. FreeBSD probably has the best desktop experience among BSDs. You can install GNOME, KDE, XFCE, all the major desktop environments work. Firefox, Chrome, LibreOffice, VS Code, most common applications are available. But there are paper cuts. Lots of them. Your webcam might not work. Suspend and resume might be flaky. The latest Steam games definitely won't work. If you have an NVIDIA card, good luck getting optimal performance. Bluetooth audio might be an adventure. It's not that these things are impossible. It's that they require more effort, more configuration, more troubleshooting than on Linux. And sometimes they just don't work, period. OpenBSD on desktop is even more challenging. The graphics drivers are intentionally conservative. Performance will be lower than Linux. Many applications aren't available. But if your needs are simple, web browsing, email, document editing, programming, it's actually quite pleasant. The system is clean, fast to boot, and you never worry about security. NetBSD. Let's just say nobody's using NetBSD on desktop unless they have very specific reasons. The fundamental issue is that desktop Linux has had 20 years of focused development for desktop use cases. Companies like Canonical, Red Hat, and System76 have invested heavily in making Linux work well on desktop and laptop hardware. BSD projects haven't made that same investment because their focus is elsewhere. Servers, networking, security. And that's okay. Not every operating system needs to be a desktop OS. FreeBSD is fantastic as a server OS. OpenBSD is unmatched as a security-focused OS. They don't need to be great at desktop to be valuable. But if you want a Unix-like system for daily desktop use, with good hardware support, modern applications, and minimal hassle, Linux is the clear choice. So BSD or Linux? Well, actually, this isn't a video about one versus the other. There's no fight here. Apart from the mediocre fanaticism on YouTube, Linux and BSD have the same origin. They're going in the same direction. They do it differently, but they're not enemies. They're two different roads running parallel toward the same destination. BSD is true Unix. It's coherence, stability, a unique vision. It's for those who want a clean, orderly system without surprises. It's for those doing networking, storage, security. It's for those who appreciate integrated documentation and design coherence. Linux is controlled chaos. It's continuous innovation, total flexibility, and enormous ecosystem. It's for those who want absolute freedom of choice. It's for desktop, laptop, cloud, containers. It's for those who want modern hardware supported immediately. The BSD license says, do what you want. The GPL of Linux says, share what you do. Neither is superior. They're choices. Personally, after this journey, I understood the fascination with BSD. The coherence is beautiful. Opening a BSD system and seeing everything logical, orderly, documented is a joy. But Linux remains my daily driver because the ecosystem, hardware support, and flexibility are unbeatable for my use, and especially for the political and philosophical vision behind it. But I have enormous respect for BSD, and I understand why those who use it speak with that tone. It's not superiority, it's love for a different philosophy. What do you think? Have you ever seriously tried BSD? See you in the next video.